Happy 2025, everybody. It's hard to believe, but it's already here. And it's only a couple of months until IndyCar starts. But I figured this would be a great way to start the year because, of course, IndyCar racing is such a large part, although not the only part, of the content that you see here. So this video pretty much is just going to set the table. We're going to talk about not only the drivers that you see on the screen, but also some of the drivers who will be coming in, some of the teams that will be coming in for the Indianapolis 500 and kind of how they came to be, and some drivers and team combinations that we haven't talked about here on this channel yet. So going to be a good video. Get a beverage, get a snack. We're going to be here for a little while. I want to mention real quick, DL 500 Club tomorrow, 8 p.m. Patreon. Going to be announcing a cool piece of content I'll be producing next week. I think it's going to make some waves in this community in particular, as well as some information on the 2027 IndyCar. So if you're not already subscribed to the DL 500 Club 2025, it's a great New Year's resolution. All right, let's talk about the 2025 driver lineup. And by the way, I was going to make my own graphic for this, but quite honestly, IndyCar did the work for me, and this is one thing that I want to shout out because I'm going to try to be, my New Year's resolution is I'm going to try to be a little nicer. It's going to last about 2 weeks, but we'll be nice for now. The social team with IndyCar, I get that this is essentially just something that Formula One did, a graphic that Formula One did, but rip off the stuff that works, and this is great. I mean, I think this is a really easy graphic to let everybody know where the silly season is, and they've continued to update this as it goes along. So shout out to the IndyCar social team, big ups, because they've really stepped it up, and they're doing a lot with a little. So let's talk about Team Penske first, because this is an easy team to know. We know the drivers. There was no speculation or controversy about them, although there's a couple of contracts, I believe Scott McLaughlin and Will Power contracts coming up at the end of this year. So there could be some movement at Team Penske at the end of this year, or I guess right after the month of May, because that's how the silly season seems to go these days. But for now, the driver lineup is Joseph Newgarden, Scott McLaughlin, and Will Power. Newgarden is, and I'm the closer we get to this, the bigger deal I realize it is, which is kind of funny because it was a big deal already that he won 2 Indianapolis 500s in a row. The chance of Joseph Newgarden winning 3 Indianapolis 500s in a row, I think, is really actually very good. And I'm very curious if he'll be able to pull it off. It's actually funny that this will be a video that comes out quite a bit later. But if you look through the drivers who have won 2 Indy 500s in a row and then tried for a third, pretty much all of them have gotten pretty close. So I would definitely expect Joseph Newgarden has a chance to make history at Indianapolis this year. But I think if you gave him some true serum and said, Joseph, I want you to tell me the straight, honest truth about this, I think Joseph would rather win a championship than win another Indianapolis 500, because the championship is where he has lacked. It's not been Indianapolis the last couple of years. It's kind of a flip-flop to the way it used to be. He used to underperform at Indy, overperform in the championship. Well, now it's kind of the opposite. So I think Joseph's goal this year is probably championship, not Indy 500. Scott McLaughlin. Now, here's something that I think was lost on a lot of people last year, was just how good of a season Scott McLaughlin had. And without the DQ at St. Pete, I believe he would have absolutely competed for a championship in Nashville. And I think, if you don't pick Palou, because Palou obviously is always going to be the championship favorite until proven otherwise, I think McLaughlin is the waiting in the wings driver to score a championship, and I think he could do it this year. He's looked really strong. Will Power, of course, competed for a championship last year. He brought it down to the last race against Palou, just missed out, but Will continues to be strong. Even as he continues to get older and older, it doesn't seem to really affect his pace, and quite honestly, as Will ages, I think he gets smarter. He becomes a better points racer than he was in the past. Makes fewer mistakes, although, of course, the mistake at Milwaukee was one that probably cost him a lot of points, although it was a mistake with the seatbelt that ultimately cost the whole team at Nashville. But, yeah, I think Will Power is going to be there, too. I mean, you can't count any of the Team Penske drivers out for the championship, or really the Indianapolis 500. Talk about Chip Ganassi Racing, because this is one of the teams that will expand for the Indianapolis 500, but for the full season, it's actually contracting with the charter system eliminating two of their entries. Kiffin Simpson is the driver who gets to join Scott Dixon and Alex Palou at Ganassi Racing. Of course, Kiff's a big financial contributor to the team. Makes a lot of sense that he would stay. But he had he showed some promise throughout the year. And he was a steady hand at times. I think a lot of people were predicting disaster for Kiffin, and that never really came. So I think that, again, just keep building on it. You want to talk about a great situation to be in as a driver, having Scott Dixon and Alex Palou as your teammates is a great situation to be in, and that's what Kiffin Simpson has. Scott Dixon, what else do we have to say about him? He's chased, I guess the big story with Scott Dixon for next year, or for this year, it's now 2025, would be the fact that he is chasing down AJ Foyt's all-time win record in championship cars or Indy cars or whatever you want to call them. And yes, I think that Scott, if he continues at the pace that he does and, races into the 2030s, which it seems like he's going to at this point, he will eclipse AJ Foyt. And I feel like we should be making a bigger deal about that. It still doesn't feel like we're making it as big of a deal that he passed Mario that we should be doing. So, yeah, Scott Dixon. What else can you say about him? Alex Palou, twice an IndyCar champion, and hasn't won on an oval yet. And I think to win another championship, Alex Palou is going to have to win on an oval. Especially because not only is this competition beginning to ramp up on the road courses, he's not as dominant as he used to be, although he is still very dominant. There's no doubt about it. But the stretch run now in IndyCar racing has a heavy emphasis on oval tracks, particularly the last two races at Milwaukee and Nashville. And these are not races that you can just qualify on the pole and expect to stay up there. They're two of the most exciting tracks now on the series. You can make passes. You can make moves. And so from a championship perspective, if it's close, Alex Palou is going to have to show up and compete on the ovals. But he was definitely making huge strides towards the end of the year, and I think he will be there on the ovals this year. And that should spell disaster for his competition. Fourth car at the Indianapolis 500, not a fifth one. Nothing confirmed as of yet, but I do believe some Ganassi alumni will be involved in the driving duties, at least with that entry, maybe some other capacities as well. Talk about Arrow McLaren, the Dallas Cowboys of IndyCar. We can't stop talking about them. They are the headline, right? They totally are. And they made a lot of headlines last year, and they weren't all good. But I think this is a team that obviously made some changes over the offseason. Gavin Ward let go. Still, I don't believe they've named a replacement yet. We'll have to see where that ends up going. But Pato O'Ward, we're just waiting for the Indianapolis 500 win at this point. You hope he's not the next Michael Andretti. But, with the performance last year, if they just put a car underneath him, he'll be there. Championship-wise, I think that's another thing. He could be right there, given the right circumstances. No doubt about it. Nolan Siegel, definitely a year where he's going to have to prove that he belongs at that team. And that's nothing against Nolan. He knows what the situation was. He was put into that position. And I think the expectation now this year, especially after half a year at that particular team to learn, I think Nolan's got to start putting up some results. And I think Tony Kanaan, who was the advocate for Nolan, is going to expect that. And we'll see how that all goes. But Nolan started to show some really good pace towards the end of the year. So we'll see if he can continue that through this year. But it's tough when you're a young driver and you don't have any seat time because of the testing regulations, which are not very good. Christian Lundgaard, of course, joins the team, moving over from Rahal Letterman Lanigan. He was courted by Arrow McLaren for quite a while, and I think Lundgaard is going to be the guy that's going to be a breakout, standout star this year. I think he's going to be real quick. You think about how fast he was for Rahal, and you think about how much further typically up the field McLaren is, we start to think about, hey, probably Christian Lundgaard's going to be pretty fast, probably win a couple of races. Will he be in the championship contention? Kind of the same question with Palou, if there is a question about Palou, and that would be the oval racing. So if Lundgaard can get the oval racing down, watch out. Here's a sleeper. By the way, fourth car for that team at the Indianapolis 500, no surprise, Kyle Larson. Already announced, and the Rookie of the Year and Brickyard 400 winner and NASCAR Cup Series champion will be back. Andretti just announced today, speaking of the Indy 500, Marco Andretti will be taking the fourth car for Andretti Global, which of course is slightly less Andretti filled this year with the departure of Michael Andretti from the team ownership duties. But Marco is back, so we will still have that name associated with the Indianapolis 500 in a driving capacity for yet another year. Colton Herta finally broke through with that oval win at Nashville. I think that's key for him. Again, the question with Herta, as usual, is consistency. If he can continue to be consistent, if he can get good finishes throughout the year, and still have those dominant wins that he puts on the field every now and then, usually one or two a year, there's no reason to expect that Colton Herta won't be a championship contender next year. I think there's a very good possibility of that. Kyle Kirkwood, he's been fast. Wasn't as good of a year last year for him as it was the prior year, but he's still got the pace. Everybody knows Kirkwood's one of the fast guys. I expect him to be up there. And Marcus Ericsson had just a dismal year last year. Wasn't all his fault, although there were some mistakes throughout the year. So Ericsson's definitely going to want to prove himself throughout this 2025 season. I think you got to put up a win on the board if you're Marcus, if not two. I think the Indianapolis 500 really kind of unraveled his season last year. I know there were some issues prior to that, but that definitely threw them out of a rhythm, and they never really recovered from it. And prior to that, those couple of crashes and the issues with getting in the field at Indianapolis, I think they were looking pretty strong for a good finish in Indy. And because the Indy 500 is such an important aspect of the championship, if you perform well or you don't perform well, it seems to kind of define the rest of your season for better or for worse. AJ Foyt Racing. This is a team that I don't expect to expand for the Indianapolis 500, so two drivers here. Santino Ferrucci returning to the team. That's great news. Santino's really kind of come on strong with this team, and they're really starting to click well. Of course, Michael Cannon has departed the team, which is kind of ironic because the Ferrucci-Malukas combination is kind of like the Dale Coyne Racing All-Stars, and I mean that in the nicest way, is that Ferrucci and Malukas were the two stars of that team, and they got to benefit from some of the Michael Cannon setups. They still will, of course, driving for AJ Foyt, but Michael Cannon's moved on to Prema. So I think Ferrucci's going to be strong as he ever was, especially at the Indianapolis 500. But really, he's becoming a great points driver, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him in the top 10 in points. David Malukas in an AJ Foyt car. Of course, he's been eyed by Roger Penske as a potential replacement should a McLaughlin or Power move on from that team at the end of this year. So certainly an important year for David Malukas to be solid. Compete for wins if you can, but just look fast, kid. You might end up in a Penske car. I think that's what I would say about David Malukas. Meyer Shank Racing. New partnership with Ganassi Racing, moving on from their previous partnership with Andretti. And interestingly, one of the Ganassi drivers who did not have a ride last at the end of the musical chairs ends up here, Marcus Armstrong. Armstrong has been impressive at times. I think he's going to be pretty strong at Meyer Shank Racing. I think there's some room to grow there for sure. And Felix Rosenquist, he's been a very solid shoe for Meyer Shank Racing. And again, he's been very, very quick at times. Pole sitter, front row starter. I wouldn't be surprised if he wins Thermal Club. There you go. Stamp it. There, Felix will win Thermal Club. If that actually happens, you owe me a cookie, Felix. But yeah, Meyer Shank Racing, of course, that team will expand for the Indianapolis 500. Elio Castroneves continuing the drive for 5. And of course, Castroneves announced yesterday to be running in the Daytona 500 for Trackhouse. So I'd be curious to see if there will be any kind of collaboration between Trackhouse and Meyer Shank Racing for the Indianapolis 500, particularly on Elio Castroneves' car. Hey, purple 91 car, that'd be pretty cool. Prema, one of the new teams to IndyCar, or the newest team to IndyCar, and the only team running the full season that does not have a charter. Of course, they brought in Michael Cannon. They've got a lot of money. They've got a lot of talent. And some of that talent is in the cockpit. Two drivers who won races in the World Endurance Championship last year. Robert Schwartzman, a true rookie to IndyCar. He won for AF Corsa at the 6 hours of the United States here at COTA. And Callum Ilott won the 6 hours of Spa in the World Endurance Championship. Schwartzman is definitely a prospect that a lot of people have an eye on in Europe and all over the world. So I think he'll be quick. Of course, there's going to be the same question marks that there are with any rookie coming to IndyCar. Can he be fast? Can he prove himself quickly? Does he not tear up equipment? And will he be able to go fast on the ovals? If you can do all of that, you'll probably have a pretty successful career in IndyCar. But he's the type of driver, Schwartzman, who is kind of the type of driver that has a good IndyCar career. He's got the right background. He's got, he comes from that European system, kind of the Formula 2 World Endurance Championship stuff that just seems to translate well. I wouldn't be surprised to see him have a good IndyCar career if he chooses to stay here, of course. Callum Ilott, another driver who has kind of bounced around a little bit over the past few years, but he's a solid shoe, and he's a pretty smart guy. I think Callum will be good. He's a good choice to lead the Prema team, although, of course, it's going to be an uphill battle for this team, not only not having a charter, but having to jump into the lion's den with all of these teams that have run IndyCars in the past. Before we get on to the final teams, do want to talk about Dreyer and Reinbold Racing real quick. They're the only team only running the Indianapolis 500 that we expect this year. They will compete once again with two cars. We've got Ryan Hunter-Reay as well as Jack Harvey, who will be taking over for Connor Daly, who, of course, is moving over to Juncos Hollander Racing. We'll talk about that in just a second. But, yeah, interesting two-car lineup. Ryan Hunter-Reay continues to earn that spot. I think he's been solid, continues to be solid. Indianapolis 500 winner. That's what Dreyer and Reinbold, ultimately, that's the entire goal of their team. So totally makes sense that Ryan Hunter-Reay is on that team. He's a solid shoe. Jack Harvey's an interesting choice, and I'm not sure what to think about it. I think Jack certainly earned his heroic stripes at the Indianapolis 500 a couple of years ago when he bumped his way into the field with the Rahal car. And we really haven't seen Jack in a strong car at Indianapolis since he was driving for Meyer Shank Racing. And certainly the Dreyer and Reinbold team knows how to put together an Indy 500 effort. And I think Ryan Hunter-Reay, as his teammate, will help out. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Jack put in a solid performance at the Indianapolis 500. But yeah, interesting choice for sure. Let's talk about Ed Carpenter Racing, because this is a team that was part of some of the early offseason highlights, and of course their big signing, Alexander Rossi. They will have Splenda sponsorship as well as Java House Coffee. An investor came in and obviously brought some money to help out that team to get Alexander Rossi. And I think Rossi, he's good friends with Ed Carpenter, which certainly helps. It helps to like your team owner. There's no doubt about it. Rossi's quick at Indianapolis, and that also applies to Rasmussen and Ed Carpenter, who will be the three-car lineup at the 500. Wouldn't be surprised to see Alexander Rossi put that car on the front row, quite honestly. You give that guy a quick car at Indianapolis, he finds his way to the front. But, of course, kind of similar to Newgarden, I think Rossi really wants to prove himself not just at Indianapolis, but throughout the rest of the season. And I guess we'll see if he can outperform what Rinus VeeKay was able to do in that car last year. Christian Rasmussen, great that he's back. Definitely earned his spot. I think he did some heroic driving throughout the season, learned, was fast. And that's what we kind of look for with a young driver. So that's a pretty solid two-car lineup. Of course, bringing in Ed for the Indianapolis 500, that's going to be quick as well. So three quick cars from Ed Carpenter Racing that you'll see throughout the year. Juncos Hollander Racing, two cars. Don't expect any expansion here. Stingray Robb is the most recent signing to this team. Not really a surprise. There were a couple of options for him. Coyne was the other one, and I think he chose the right path here. I think Juncos is the right place of the available seats to go. And I think, here's the thing about Stingray. I mean, yes, is he going to be the front running driver? Is he going to be winning championships? No, but he hasn't. Kind of similar to what I said about Siegel, is that he's been solid, and I think he will continue to improve. And that's all you can really expect. And, he had a great Indianapolis 500. And if you look at what Agustin Canapino was able to do in that car last year, there's some potential for Stingray at Indianapolis. Connor Daly, another great signing. We're glad to see that one get across the finish line. Connor definitely deserved this drive after finishing on the podium for Juncos at Milwaukee and getting them the Leaders Circle money. That was huge for Juncos Hollinger Racing. And so, Connor, it's great to see him back full time. I think that now's the time to prove that you belong if you're Connor Daly. Continue to build on that Milwaukee result, show up well on the road and street courses, and of course the Indianapolis 500. He's one of the faster drivers at that racetrack and always seems to find a way to elevate the teams that he's on. And so from Juncos' perspective, it's a great driver to have. We'll talk about Dale Coyne Racing last. We'll talk about Rahal Letterman Lanigan next. Obviously, there's a bit of a funding gap that has been created with this team because Hy-Vee elected to leave the team, although they're staying involved in IndyCar, at least in some capacity, for next year, but certainly not at the level they were with Rahal. Although I would think a sponsor like Mobile One might be one to step up throughout the rest of the season. We'll see on that one. Graham Rahal, of course, returning to the Rahal Letterman Lanigan team. He is the backbone of the team at this point. Graham is the guy who has built the setup sheet. He has been there the longest. And when the team is working well, Graham is there. When the team is not working well, Graham is not there. And that just seems to be how it goes with that team. But, Graham has had some solid performances in the past. And again, it's just about getting the car underneath him. There was a time when he almost won a championship for this team. So it's not outside of the realm of possibility to see Rahal Letterman Lanigan rise back up. But, the question is always going to be qualifying in Indianapolis until they prove us otherwise. Devlin DeFrancesco returns to the series after a one-year hiatus. I think, I'll make this prediction. I think Devlin's best race is going to be the Indy GP. That's his best track, and it's also Rahal Letterman Lanigan's best track. So I think there's a good potential for a good finish there for Devlin. He's been working on this for a while, and so it's good to see this kind of come together and Devlin return to the series. We'll see how it works out. That's always going to be the question. And, of course, really cool signing, I think, for Rahal Letterman Lanigan is the fact that Louis Foster, the Indy Lights, Indy Next, presented by Firestone, champion, getting signed to a team. We always worry about that, especially after what happened to Linus Lundqvist. And by the way, we're going to have to put him back on the milk carton because where is Linus Lundqvist? But anyway, Louis Foster gets an opportunity with Rahal Letterman Lanigan. I think that's going to be a solid combination, and I think there's some room to impress for Louis Foster because I think the expectations being in the third Rahal car are going to be a little bit lower than it would be if he, say signed for McLaren right away. So, you know what? I think Louis Foster is going to impress a lot of people next year for sure. Dale Coyne Racing. Well, thanks, Dale, for still adhering to the fact that the offseason is indeed 6 months, and when everybody signs their drivers in July, we don't have anything to talk about for 6 months. So thank you, Dale, for being the only person who is able to stave off too much talk about the third manufacturer, which, let's be honest, at least Dale will eventually sign a driver. Or two. I think he will sign two. At least two, probably more. I think Rinus VeeKay will likely be a full-time driver for this team at some point next year. We'll see, but if I was a betting man, I'd bet on Rinus in one of those cars. The second car, probably going to be a rotating door. Wouldn't be surprised to see Catherine Legg return for the Indianapolis 500. You'd like to think a driver like Toby Sowery or maybe a Hunter McElrea would get another opportunity because they showed pretty well when they got an opportunity in the Dale Coyne Racing car. Maybe you could throw a name like Jacob Abel out there as another one who could kind of slide in to that second car at some point. We'll have to see. No expectation of expansion there for the Indianapolis 500. I should mention Rahal, I keep hearing like iffy on expansion for the 500. I hope that's not the case. I'd love to see Takuma Sato land somewhere. And you would think that Rahal would just make a lot of sense, especially after last year with that team, but we'll have to see. And if there is a fourth Rahal car, which I hope there is, that would most likely put us at 36 entries for the Indianapolis 500, which I think would be absolutely awesome. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's kind of a state of where things are right now in IndyCar. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.